And I will open with sharing the agenda.
Great. So we thought we would just start off with some quick introductions. So my name is Nadia Mohammed, and I want to thank you all for being here. I am the Advisory Bodies Coordinator. I work with the Homeless Services Division in the Department of Housing. And specifically, I work with the Homeless Solutions Advisory Council. The Equitable Procurement Subcommittee is one of the subcommittees of the Solutions Council, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Who wants to should just pass it on? Jim?
Okay, well, thank you, Nadia. I'm Jim Bain. I'm a community member on the Homeless Solutions Advisory Committee and also on the Metro Committee of the similar name. And I'm a retired physician and have worked in the area of homelessness for many years. I still do some volunteer work, and as Nadia knows, I'm highly qualified for this committee because I know absolutely nothing about procurement.
So no conflicts.
I'll go now. I'm Stacy Triplett, a member of the Solutions Committee as well, or Council as well. And I unfortunately do know a lot about procurement and have been on many different sides of it. So I'm happy to serve on this committee. And I apologize, I'm going to have to leave early, but I will quietly exit.
Morning, everyone. I'm Kim Ezel. I work for the City of Tigard as the Program Manager for Strategic Initiatives, which means I lead the city's response to houselessness, and I use she, her pronouns.
I can go. I'm Catherine Gallion, Program Manager with the Department of Housing Services. Nice to see some very familiar faces.
Hello, I'm Pat Rogers. I am retired now, but I managed homeless housing and homeless programs at Community Action for a number of years.
Good morning. Can y'all hear me okay with the mask on? Okay. Hi, I'm Valeria McWilliams. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Regional Line Supervisor at Metro, so I support regionalization of our supportive housing services program and policies, along with in collaboration with our county partners, including Washington County. And I will just say I have some access needs during this meeting. I may be off camera. Just at OHSU in a waiting room. Yeah, thank you.
I'm Chris Smock. I'm an independent consultant and working with Washington County to support their HUD COC application process. And I use she, her pronouns.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Carly Brandini. I'm part of the Business Operations Branch in Homeless Services. She, her pronouns, Quality Improvement Program Coordinator.
Good morning. I'm Julaine Potter. I'm the Interim Program Manager for Homelessness in the City of Beaverton.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joshua Fleming. I use he and they pronouns. I work for Oregon Housing and Community Services, the state's finance agency. I am our racial equity policy strategist within the Housing Stabilization Division that oversees all of our grants and programs related to shelters and eviction prevention and things like weatherization and energy assistance to keep people in their homes. I have worked at the COC level in Clackamas County. I have worked at the direct service level in the Multnomah and Clackamas County areas. as a direct service staff, as well as a program manager and director. And now I work at the state level, working on our procurement processes to make them more equitable and inclusive and accessible for CBOs and CAAs at the same time. I've got lived experience in addiction and homelessness as a child and as an adult. And so I'm happy to be here and share my perspective.
Great. Thank you, everyone, and welcome again. So we wanted to just, thought I'd just go over a little bit about Solutions Council, because some of you might be familiar and some of you might not. So the Solutions Council was set up this year to bring together what was previously the Homeless Plan Advisory Committee and the Continuum of Care Board. And the idea was to bring it together into one integrated structure. And the Solutions Council is there to provide like oversight and feedback to the county on its various programs regarding homeless services. Within the Solutions Council, there's also several technical subcommittees. So there's the Equitable Procurement Subcommittee is the one that we're discussing today. And this committee has the responsibility for defining local funding priorities for the annual COC HUD NOFO based on the information provided by another technical subcommittee called the Performance Evaluation Subcommittee. And then there's a lot more that I think on the specifics that Catherine could maybe fill us in on that I might probably state incorrectly.
Sure, I'll give it a shot, and Chris, do feel free to hop in as you see fit. But really, what this group is looking to do is in our governance shifting, we moved a lot of responsibilities that had been primarily the role of a separate COC board that did a lot of these kind of technical pieces, and it's all now wrapped into one overarching governance structure. So this piece of the COC governance work is specific around approving the HUD COC applications, reviewing new projects and renewing projects, and then also looking to expand and integrate the other pieces of the homeless services system, specifically some of the SHS stuff as well. So our first task for this group is COC specific, but over time that role will expand and evolve. And we've separated out, for those of you who have been with the COC board in the past, and I know there are at least a couple of you here, we've separated kind of two components, the rating and ranking from the approval of the actual individual projects, to remove that conflict of interest that was so common on the old COC board. And so the rating and ranking process has been reviewed and approved already, and your role is really to evaluate the individual projects within that within that system. That may have been too deep into the technical details, but hopefully it's a good enough overview of what we're looking to do in the immediate term.
And just to reassure people, I'm going to go into those technical details step by step in a few minutes. So if that was some unfamiliar language, don't worry, we'll walk you through it.
Thank you, Catherine and Chris. Are there any questions at this time before we move on? Great. And Chris, I think you're up.
Yeah, Meredith, if you could share the slides. I think we've covered the first few. Yeah, so we can scroll down to the continuum of care competition slide. All right, so I'm going to provide just an overview of the HUD continuum of care process and the role of this committee, and provide some background. We have 3 discussion questions today and one sort of key decision that has to be made. And so I'm going to provide some initial background, and then for each of those discussions, I'll explain what the discussion is going to focus on, provide some additional background information, and then we'll open it up for discussion. But feel free to interrupt me at any point if you need more clarity, or if you want me to go into more detail on anything. It's always hard to know how much things start to seem obvious when you're doing this work over a number of years, and it's hard to know how much needs to be explained to folks that are new. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. The decision-making process and procurement process that you all are going to be guiding in the next few months is related to the Continuum of Care program competition. So this is a federal grant competition administered by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. And Washington County Department of Housing Services is what HUD refers to as the collaborative applicant for the local continuum of care. So to be eligible for this federal funding, which is sort of the main federal funding available for homeless services, communities across the country are required to create these formal bodies referred to as a continuum of care. And there are various requirements to be a continuum of care. And it mostly involves having representation from a wide range of different types of organizations that are engaged in homeless services, or in various ways interacting with people experiencing homelessness. And then each continuum of care has what's referred to as the collaborative applicant, which is the lead agency that leads and guides the application process, and is sort of the main contact with HUD for this funding process. It's an annual funding process that's kicked off when HUD releases the notice of funding opportunity for the annual competition. In the last few years, they have released that in early July. It's always a little unpredictable. They provide no forewarning and no really clear information about when it will be released. There are often rumors that it's going to be released early. This year, the rumors were that it would be released in May. Obviously, that has not happened. So our best guess is that it will be in early July, but it's just a little unpredictable. And then once it's released, there's a set time frame for accomplishing a number of required tasks that are part of that process. And many of those tasks are the timeline for those tasks within the overall framework of deadlines that HUD has provided, that like the timeline for those kind of subtasks is prescribed by HUD rules and requirements, which makes it particularly frustrating that we don't know in advance when it will be released. We'll get more into that when we talk about the timing of your role in a few minutes. So for the competition, Washington County will be eligible to apply for about $5.5 million. So one of the nice things about this grant program is that the grants that are that we currently get we're eligible to apply for renewal every year. Renewal is not guaranteed, but we have a fairly good chance of getting those grants renewed, and I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. So the application process involves submitting applications for renewal of existing grants, and then each COC is eligible to apply for a specific amount of funding for new projects each year. And so we'll have a competitive local process for those funds. And then, as Catherine mentioned, the local competition is guided by an application and award policy that has been approved by the Solutions Council for this year's competition. So we already sort of have a framework that will guide how the process goes. You can go to the next slide, Meredith. So want to kind of talk through the steps in the local competition. So HUD releases the notice of funding opportunity. That gives us an understanding of the parameters of the funding competition. And then as soon as we can, once that's released, Washington County releases a local request for proposals that opens up the local competition for HUD funds. And we try and do that as quickly as possible because the time frame is usually very quick to get through this whole process. So that RFP invites any new applicants to submit proposals for the available funding. And then so we set a deadline for that. They submit the proposals. We also use that RFP as a notification to the existing projects that already have grants that they are required to submit information to Washington County so that we can work with them to submit their renewal applications. So for both the renewal applications and the new project applications, we have in that application and award policy detailed evaluation criteria that we refer to as the ratings worksheets, separate criteria for renewal applications and for new applications. And so for the renewal projects, the ratings worksheet is focused on performance and objective criteria. So the county completes the ratings worksheets. We gather all the different underlying data that's used for those different ratings. We do the analysis of the data and then the scoring based on the scoring rubric that's in the rating worksheet. But for new projects, we don't have performance data. And so that's where you all come in as the first step, is that the Equitable Procurement Subcommittee is responsible for scoring the new project proposals. And you could do that based on their written proposals and or presentations. And so that's one of the things we'll talk about. That's a decision point for you. So once you've scored the new project proposals, at that point, then we have ratings for all of the potential applications. And then the next step for this committee is to go through and rank all the new and renewal project applications. That's a step that's required by HUD. And then the highest ranking projects are selected for submission to HUD. And then we fold those into the broader application that the county is putting together for the continuum of care. And those get submitted to HUD. And then HUD goes through its decision-making process. Next slide. So I realize this is too small for you to probably read, but I just wanted to give you a sense of what this rating tool looks like that you'll be using to guide this process. So this is the rating tool for renewal applications. We have a very similar one for new projects with slightly different focus since we don't have performance data. Stacy's asking, do I want questions now? Yes, please interrupt at any point. Yeah, go for it.
Sorry, yeah, I wasn't sure. I didn't want to interrupt your flow. Could you go back to the slide before? It created a question in my mind. Oh, that was the question. The last thing, highest ranking projects are selected for submission to HUD. Do we typically have many more projects ranked that are not submitted? You know what I'm asking? So like, yeah, okay, you get it. And then does HUD select in the order that we, provided, that we ranked, or are they doing a different analysis and pulling from our list in different ways?
Yeah, good question. And I might be able to, I'm going to answer it broadly now, and then some of the more detailed slides will probably help provide a little more information about this. But yeah, so HUD is required to have this be a competitive process. But there's also a recognition that if there are projects that are already funded, people are already housed within those projects, there's a challenge of making this a completely competitive process and unfunding lots of existing projects. So HUD tries to balance that. So So what they do is basically say, you know, a percentage, we're sort of almost guaranteed, very likely guaranteed, a fairly high percentage of the existing funding. And then we have the opportunity to be funded up to the amount that HUD has said we are eligible for. And so the reason for the ranking is then we know anything that falls within the part where we're sort of almost guaranteed, those projects are very likely to get funded. The other projects, it's more competitive. And in general, the HUD selection process is based mostly on our score as a continuum of care as a whole. So it's based, those projects, HUD sort of trusts that we've ranked them based on our own priorities. And so HUD is mostly looking for the broader score for all these other things that HUD is evaluating for us as a continuum. And based on that, they determine how much of that additional eligible funding we can get. And so just for new project proposals, I will say last year we had 2 proposals, the year before we had 1. So we don't get a ton. Hopefully we'll get more this year. Generally, we don't, usually what we're ending up having to do is to select 1 to move forward because there isn't that much funding available. But if we got proposals that added up together to the available funding, we could put more than 1 forward. And then for the renewal projects, it's sort of ranking them because the one that ends up at the bottom has some risk of losing funding because of the way that HUD structures the competition. So yeah, it's not a ton of projects that are at risk of not being funded, but there is a competitive aspect. Yeah, Jim.
What was last year's amount that was awarded? You said we have 5.5 expected this year. What was last year's?
Yeah, so that's basically on last year's. So what happened, so the exact amounts aren't known because HUD adjusts the amounts based on fair market rent. So as rents are going up, the actual amount that's awarded to projects is adjusted up. So, but last year, we were awarded about 5.5 million. We were not awarded the new, all of our renewal projects were renewed. We did not get funding for the new project application that we put forward. The previous year, we did have our new project application funded. So it's always just a little bit unpredictable. Any other questions before I move on? All right. Yeah, if we can go back to the rating tool. So this just gives you a sense that, you know, how many different criteria we have that we're assessing. The rating tool indicates the points that are awarded to each criteria. And so it's a very structured decision-making process. And then those points just get added up for each project. So we have a total score for each project. Next slide. So the first decision we need from you is how you want to score the new project. So there are 2 options. One is that you do it entirely based on written proposals, and the second is that you do it based on presentations. So historically, before the change in Washington County's governance process that was implemented this year, historically what's happened is new project applicants have submitted a written proposal. That written proposal has been reviewed by staff, and then there are certain objective criteria, like did they submit a recent audit, and did the audit have any findings, things like that. Those objective criteria are scored by staff. And then in the past, all of the new project applicants were required to make a presentation at the HISN, the Housing and Supportive Services Network, where all of the participants at that meeting listen to the presentation, and then organizational members that were eligible to vote would then caucus together and score the remaining criteria for those new project proposals. And then, and that all happened in the context of that one meeting. And then we would just average those scores together, and that would be the way that the new projects were scored. So we could do something similar where we would require new project applicants to make a presentation to all of you, and then you would complete your scoring based on those presentations and submit your scores at that presentation meeting. We would compile them and average them together, and based on that, we would have those scores. The other option is that we send you their written applications, you review those applications on your own time, and then you submit your scores electronically based on the written application, and then we would compile those scores together. Either option that you choose, we would need to have some time between the time when you submit those scores and then the meeting where you would get together and look at all the scores for new and renewal project applications and go through that ranking process. So at a minimum, you would have one meeting as part of this process where you would look at all of the scores for all the combined scores for all the projects, and you would work through the ranking process and the selection process. And if you did presentations, you would have an additional meeting for those presentations, but you would have less reading to do because you wouldn't necessarily be needing to read and score based on the written proposals. And then just to give you a sense of time commitment, the written proposals are about 10 pages of content, but about 5 of those pages are the narrative content that you would be responsible for really reading and scoring things based on. So think about the options. I'm just going to provide a little bit more background information before we open it up for discussion. So Meredith, if we could go to the next slide. So this is just to give you a sample timeline of how this process worked last year. There's a little bit of wiggle room, but some constraints because of the way HUD structures the competition. So last year, the HUD NOFO was released on July 5th. We released the local RFP for the local funding competition on July 10th. Projects were required to submit their written applications July 31st, and then the presentations from the new project applicants was August 2nd. And that was scheduled because that was the regular HISN meeting. There's a little bit of wiggle room in terms of it was a pretty quick turnaround process for them to get an application in and a presentation. But in general, those presentations would be about a month to 6 weeks after the NOFO is released. And then about a month later, the COC board met to look at all of the compiled scores and conduct its project rating, ranking, and selection. And then following that, there's a very quick turnaround of we have to notify all the applicants in a very structured way within a certain timeline of the results of that. And then we have to post all of the applications online for public review and comment, and then finally submit the application to HUD. And typically we try and do that a couple of days before their deadline. So first, what is probably obvious from this is all happening this summer, assuming that HUD releases the NOFO around the same timeline. And so if you had one meeting, it would be sometime probably late August, early September. And if you had 2 meetings, it would be probably sometime in early to mid-August, and then late August, early to mid-September. Okay, so if you want to go to the next slide, Meredith, this is just, again, framing the options, and we can stop screen sharing, and I'll turn it over to Catherine to facilitate some discussion and decision.
I think real quick, we had two people that just joined a little late. Maybe we do a quick introduction for Anna and Mitchell.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I am Ana Hernandez Garcia. I am here with the Oregon Department of Human Services, but specifically with the self-sufficiency programs out of the Hillsborough office. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, Anna. And Mitchell? Are you able to unmute and introduce yourself?
Oh, he mentioned that he had to step away for a moment and must not be back yet. So,
okay.
Right. Sorry about the confusion with the Teams link, everyone. Thank you for being flexible and getting into the Zoom. Right, go ahead.
Thanks, Meredith. Okay, so essentially we have kind of a decision point. To presentations or not to presentations, that is the question. And there's some kind of comments already in the chat. So Stacy, do you want to voice your thought?
Sure. Sorry, I use the chat that way. Some meetings don't like that, so I'm happy to not use the chat that way.
You can use the chat, it's fine.
Okay, good. Thank you. I think the nature of this process, since it is so structured, doesn't really, having that quick turnaround presentation, while it's helpful, I'm sure, for the HISN to be involved, I don't think you're gaining much. And I think it does introduce, just more feelings of bias and things like that into the folks who have to make the quick presentation, and then what happened with the presentation. I don't know. It doesn't feel like it adds that much to me. So that's my suggestion of no presentation and, extra reading time.
Thank you, Stacy. Any others?
Well, I kind of always felt like I didn't mind the presentations as much per se, because it's good to have hear the enthusiasm, or I don't know how to put it, but to hear the narrative kind of spoken by the person who wants to submit the project. But I didn't like making a decision about it right after the presentation. I kind of felt like it needed to happen without them present in a different meeting of some sort.
Yeah. Thank you, Pat. So time to process what you're seeing, and a little distance between the scoring, or the scoring and the announcement of the award, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and then getting that different take from just having read the narrative, while also hearing from the person who is submitting the project. That little kind of combination works for me, but I can live without the presentation as well.
Yeah, I'd agree with what Pat just was talking about. I was part of the HISN process last year, and I found the proposal of the presentation part of the proposal to be extremely helpful for adding context, especially because it can be such a short turnaround for the written, that I got a lot more out of what I could hear from the narrative explanation of the project proposal than from the written.
Thank you, Kim.
I'm curious if your COC has done engagement with local providers, and if there is feedback on which of these two options that they have experience with they prefer more. And then, kind of as an aside, I'm curious, with either option moving forward, is there a plan to provide some level of TA or training sessions, engagement opportunities for those organizations that might be applying for new funding that are unfamiliar with this process?
Great question, Joshua. So our COC is really all about engaging with the providers. It's really the bulk of what is done, and I'll let Chris speak to the kind of pre-proposal sessions that we normally do, if you don't mind, Chris.
Sure. Yeah. So we do informational session that is optional, but it's also recorded and available online for people who can't make it. So once we release the RFP, it includes the RFP itself, and all of our communication include information about that session. And so that's an opportunity. We sort of review the information in the RFP, go into a little bit more background on the competition and its chance for providers that might be interested in submitting proposals to ask any questions. We also have a way for providers to continue to ask questions and get answers and responses throughout that process before they submit the initial applications. One of the things that we also do is that the HUD application itself is pretty clunky. So what we're asking them to submit in that step of the process is a shorter, modified version of an application that gets us the information we need for the scoring, but it's just something we've created ourselves. So we try and move away from some of the more just challenging aspects of HUD's application. And then whichever application is selected to move on, then we actually we run the process of getting their application into HUD's portal and just work back and forth with them to get the information that we need, but we sort of manage that whole part of so that they just don't have to deal with that aspect of things.
Mm-hmm.
So the goal is to make it as accessible as possible, right? So the the moving forward is based on the merit of the project that's being proposed. I'll also maybe just add that the providers are the continuum of care is involved in selecting, reviewing the data that goes into selecting the funding priorities, the local funding priorities as well.
So Catherine, you mentioned that your COC is all about engagement, but I didn't really hear if you had any kind of feedback for which one of these two methods of scoring and judging your CBOs, maybe even your culturally specific or your smaller and less established CBOs actually seem to prefer.
We have not surveyed them about that topic specifically, and we intentionally left it open in our rating and ranking policy that we could or could not based on really kind of the needs of this group as well. So Jim.
As a new person, I would strongly go toward the presentation model just for the simple fact of being able to learn more. And I think as Joshua said, for me, newer groups that are not familiar with this federal bureaucracy, by the way, I retired from the VA, so I'm not unfamiliar with this, would give a better opportunity to present. I also understand that I have a different time frame being retired than some of the other people, and it may be more time consuming. And lastly, I think what Pat said and Kim agreed with is it seemed really uncomfortable to make a decision right after the presentation. It's sort of like voting on Queen for a day. So I would think that an alteration in that process would be really helpful.
Oh, no, absolutely. I don't think we have any intention of doing it that way this year. No, we won't be doing it that way. Any other? Go ahead, Valeria.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify what is being proposed right now. What I'm hearing is, could you just share with me like the sequencing? So, because I'm hearing like proposals, but we would have ranked already the projects by that time. I'm just a little bit confused on what is being proposed, I guess. If we go with option B, presentations are part of this process versus option A, no presentations. So could you just help me understand the sequencing that's being proposed? Thank you.
Yeah, well, and that's helpful. I should have listed an option C because I feel like maybe we're leaning towards an option C. So I'll describe all three of these, the sequencing. and now I'm trying to remember, was option A was no
No
presentation.
presentations.
Okay. So if there's no presentation, you would receive the written proposals, and you would at the same time get the scoring rubric and our scoring of the objective criteria. And then you would have access to it would probably be like a SurveyMonkey, like electronic form for you to enter your scores for the remaining criteria, which are like the non-technical ones. And you would have, a certain turnaround time to fill that out and submit your scores. And then, a couple weeks later, or 2 or 3 weeks later, you would meet as a group and you would review the average scores together and make some decisions about ranking. So that's option 1. Option B would be that you would receive those written proposals. You would have a meeting where you would hear presentations. So ideally you would have, sorry, no, I'm getting into option C. Option B was trying to streamline it, which is you have a meeting where you hear the presentations, and then you would fill out that electronic scoring form and submit your responses. We would just get those scores. We wouldn't announce them at the meeting or discuss them, and the presenters wouldn't be there anymore. But it would be you hearing, getting to ask questions, and then submitting your scores. Option C is that you would receive the written proposal, you would read it, you would then have a meeting where you would get presentations, you would be able to ask questions, then you would submit your scores based on a combination of the written proposal and the presentation. And then again, 2 or 3 weeks later, you would meet and review the scores across all the proposals and make some decisions.
Stacy?
Question. I think we're not paying attention to the fact that the majority of this system is actually renewal. And so the idea that we're going to learn a lot through the presentations is not accurate. So what we're talking about right now is just the 1 or 2 or 3 or however many there are new folks intending and hoping to get into the system, not a real good sense of like, oh, I got a great briefing of what the providers are all doing, because the majority of funding is going through the renewal direct in process. And so I just don't want to make us create a more onerous and burdensome process for anybody who wants to be in this new, unlikely to be funded, let's be honest, pile. Right? Maybe they will, maybe they not, right? We don't know. But there's a whole group of other providers that are just kind of in the renewal bucket, which is great. And, they're the backbone of this system. But if we're making presentations for someone, they might have more capacity to provide presentations than the new people who are like, oh, unfamiliar with what am I getting myself into, and will probably need a lot of support and technical assistance. And we have all those things set up for those things. But adding a presentation on top of that doesn't feel inviting, equitable. It doesn't feel the best way to build capacity. And it feels like it's really the renewal projects that should be, making a presentation, not on this short time frame, but in a time so that whichever council, whatever group can be familiar and great advocates for the system.
Thank you, Stacy. Yeah, that you are correct. We don't currently request and have not historically requested presentations from renewal applicants at all. Just scoring based on performance.
Catherine, I'm trying to remember last year, I felt like the 2 new projects that were being proposed were both proposed by organizations who were also funded through renewal projects, and that they were new programs that they were, so they're not folks that are necessarily brand new to this process, but folks who are looking to expand their program through that. Is that accurate?
No, well, they could be. So last year, it just so happened that both of the applications came from current recipients. The year before, it was a brand new, never before received HUD funding. So it can really be anyone.
And just want to add one element to that, which is that when we're engaging with folks who are considering whether to submit proposals for this funding, I mean, I know last year there was a lot of some questions from groups that were entirely new to this system that really focused on how flexible is this funding? If I want to do this, can I do this? And in our engagement with those organizations, what became pretty clear was because they're newer, they're doing things maybe outside the box, that they're a better fit for our local funding, which is much more flexible. And we have a lot more of it. So the supportive housing services funding, then they were a fit for this very rigid, pretty constrained funding source. And so, so that's part of the technical assistance that happens, is really helping organizations to understand, like, what does it mean to take money from HUD? And, you know, is this going to meet your needs as an organization and the kind of goals that you're trying to achieve? Does this provide the level of flexibility you need, or is this going to box you into something that doesn't fit your needs? And so, you know, that one reason why we're probably getting mostly proposals from organizations that have gone through this before is, like, this is a more onerous process than the process of receiving funds that are locally funded programs. So.
Thank you, Chris. Julian, I see your hand is up.
Oh, I just wanted to say that, yeah, I agree with Stacy's comments, just kind of about the bias of presentations and the quality. But I also appreciate hearing from Kim that it really helps to hear from folks. I've only been on grant committees where it's all been written information. So, but I was curious about the Q&A component of it, because I like that piece of it, of being able to clarify things in person. And if there weren't presentations, is there another way to get questions answered from applicants?
Yes, I think if we didn't do presentations, we would necessarily need to build in some kind of response process. We would have to make sure that whatever we do, it would be consistent and equitable in how we approach it. So that is one benefit for the presentations, is that it would be very consistent. I want to just do a quick time check. I'm not sure where we are with our time. This was just discussion one. There is another discussion topic to get into. So I'm wondering if people feel comfortable, if anyone has any last thoughts to share, and if we feel comfortable just moving into a vote. Any last thoughts to share?
The only other thing I'm curious about, it might give us a good idea of how to vote, thinking about the number of applicants that will need to be reviewed.
I think the most we've ever had in a single year was maybe 3. And it's been a while since we've had that many. We're talking 1 or 2 at the most. And sometimes we've got to work hard to get 1. Yeah, these are HUD funds. They are a lot to take on. I think too. I can't remember whose point it was, but yeah, that most of the applicants know what they're getting into, and already have processes in place to manage it, just because it is a big lift for a new organization that's never received these funds before. Do we feel comfortable going to a vote, or is there? Do we feel the need for more discussion? Okay. So I feel like we have 3 options on the table now. Option A, no presentations. Option B, presentations. And option C, applications on their own time. And then presentations, Q&A/Q&A sessions with each provider or with each applicant. And do we have a poll? Oh, go ahead, Julaine.
Oh, I was just wondering, so with option C, would that be like scoring interview style during the presentations, or would there be a chance to have to score afterwards?
Yeah, option C would be scoring afterwards. So you would use the presentations to ask questions and help to clarify anything, and then you would have time to score.
Thanks.
Do we have a poll for this? Or no, we're voting in the chat.
Yeah, I think we need to vote for the chat. I'm trying to quickly see if I could make a poll, but I am not that fast in Zoom. I'm trying to see if I can do this.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can change a poll after the meeting's already started. I don't know if that
I'm
works.
I'm trying real quick.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see if this let me work.
Any last questions while Meredith's working on that?
No, oh, there we go. I just wanted to appreciate the space that you all created to have these discussions and share. So thank you.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for engaging in it so openly. That's fantastic. It's pretty impressive for our first time together.
And if I could just get a quick thumbs up on the screen if you voted, so then I can know.
Which option was no presentations? Option A was no presentations. Option B was presentation. So option A is written applications only, no presentations. Option B is only presentations. And option C is a little bit of both. Did I phrase that? Did I get that right, Chris? A simplified written application and a presentation Q&A.
Okay, I'm going to assume that we've got everybody. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And let's see, here we go. Sharing.
Oh, look at that.
So
50-50. And everybody voted? Look at that. We have an even number of people on the committee. Oh, that's fun. I'm gonna look to you, Nadia. Do we have a plan for if this happens?
Well, do we want to have like a little bit more discussion? Do we want to try to have the vote again? I mean, the C kind of incorporates A in a way. So there's a little bit of both there versus, just the presentation.
I voted for C. I'm absolutely open to changing my vote to A. This is not a hill I'll stand on firmly.
Me as well.
I was just gonna say, like, for option A, I mean, I feel like hearing you say already that it's hard enough to have folks apply for federal funding, is, if that's already a barrier, like if you're not having enough folks applying for it, I just feel like a presentation creates an additional barrier, or it just would deter folks from being like, okay, yeah, like another extra step that I have to make. And so to me, it just feels like it makes it less accessible, or not even, okay, accessibility could be one thing, but just like it doesn't incentivize folks to try and apply for it. So that's just my only concern. Federal funding's already just like, it's like you said, it's like they know what they're going for. So I would just I think the end goal is not even, the end goal for me is like even bigger than this. The end goal is like, how do we promote and support these opportunities? So that's why I voted A, and would suggest folks maybe taking that into consideration.
Thank you, Valeria.
So we don't have to lobby and lobby. Let's redo the vote. I think
Let's
we might get it.
Thanks, Stacy. Can we
Meredith,
can
is
we
that okay?
run it again?
Yeah, I just added flexible with any choice and abstain so that if we need to take those out, if that's okay. Save. Okay.
Just don't everybody vote for flexible for with any choice.
That's all right. Relaunching. Oh, it's not showing it. Okay. I'm sorry. Just
If you are abstaining, you can just close it. Like staff are not voting, so we just close the box.
Wait, I closed it, but I thought because we were gonna get another one with the, I'm sorry. I'm
No,
so
it's okay.
sorry.
No worries, no worries. It was going too smooth for our first time, so we had to throw a little hiccup in it. Just everybody close it and we'll run it one more time.
Yeah. All right. Hold on a second.
No worries.
I'm getting all kinds of Zoom practice. This is great.
Learning on the go.
I am.
That's what we do.
And hold on. Okay, I'm really hoping this works.
I just wanted to provide a little feedback while we're, I was just thinking about the formal presentation and that maybe, it doesn't need to be, and I don't want to muddy this process. I think we should just move forward with, revoting, but in thinking about, maybe it doesn't need to be it doesn't need to be a PowerPoint. Maybe it's an invitation to have a discussion, and maybe there's an assumption that that would be a burden to the providers when actually they would love to get in front of us and talk about their awesome programs. So I guess I just want to, keep that in mind.
Thanks, Jillian.
I appreciate you sharing that. I think when we think of a presentation, we're definitely thinking more about like, or I'm assuming, presentation for me is just like the technical aspect of it. So I do really appreciate changing even the word to a conversation. Thank you.
Okay, so that should be going.
And it updated.
Okay, I think I have everyone is answered. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Right, able to see that.
I just
Valeria?
had a thought. Since I think you've received a lot of helpful feedback. And you mentioned that you haven't done any like surveying. Maybe it would be a good idea for this process to include a survey at the end and maybe just ask the question of like, would you be open to presentation or a conversation? Like just to kind of get a sense, and that can better inform also our decision and knowing like in the future, how providers like to be engaged.
That's great. Thank you, Valeria. Meredith, are you sharing the results? Because I'm not
Oh.
seeing them yet.
It didn't
Okay.
share.
It looks like
I
some
saw
people
them.
saw them. Okay, I did
Okay.
not. Did we
Yeah.
get an answer? Oh, okay, good. No presentations this time, and we will follow up with a survey. Okay, that sounds like a decision has been made. Thank you all, and thanks for the robust discussion. And yes, this is our first time, and we are moving quickly because HUD. And so yeah, we will continue to work together to perfect these processes as we go. All right, shall we move on, Chris?
Yeah, so we have two more discussion topics. We don't need to reach decisions. But Meredith, if we could get the slides up again. Yes. Okay. And we can go
to the next slide.
So the next discussion is about the ranking process and whether you want to consider a different approach to ranking new projects in relation to renewal projects. So I'm going to, again, just explain some of the context of this, and then we'll open it up for discussion. So if we could go to the next slide. So the way that the project ranking works is renewal projects are ranked. Those projects are just ranked based on their ratings, their total ratings from the rating worksheet that I showed earlier. One of the renewal projects is for the Homeless Management Information System. It's a requirement of HUD, and it's not scored. It's just put in position one. That's just sort of the way that it has always been done. And then we have sometimes renewals that have just started, and we have one of those this year, and we don't have performance data to score. So we automatically place those after the other renewals. And those by HUD requirements are not eligible for reallocation, which I'll explain what that is in a moment. But otherwise, aside from those two exceptions, all the other renewals are just put in rank order based on their ratings. And then we have the new projects that are scored in relation to one another. So those are ranked in relation to one another based on their ratings. Sometimes there's been questions about, well, can't we just rank them all, renewal and new, from top to bottom based on their ratings? But the problem is that the ratings for the renewal projects are based on performance data, and we don't have performance data for the new projects. So the ratings aren't comparable. We're really looking at kind of apples and oranges. So historically, what we've done is we rank the new projects, and then we place them in the rankings underneath the renewals. And the application and award policy notes that historically that's what we have done, but it says that the committee has the option of placing one or new project applications higher in the rankings for strategic reasons, as long as the rank order of the new project applications is maintained. So you couldn't decide, oh, the one that was ranked last, we're going to put it up higher in the ratings. It needs to be, the one that was ranked first, but you have that option. So I realize you can't, we're not asking for a decision on this because you haven't seen the applications, but this is often an issue that when we get to the point of doing the rankings, this is like a really thorny question. And so wanted to provide the kind of background information to this and give you a chance to just start kind of percolating some ideas so that we're kind of in a better position for you to make this decision when we're actually in that meeting where you're doing the rankings. So if we could go to the next slide. So this is what you're going to be looking at in that ranking meeting. So the renewal projects, this is the list of this year's renewal projects. And this is just how they were ranked last year, but the ranking will change based on their renewal ratings. And so they'll be listed here in the renewal rating column. There will be a number, and the ranking will be based on that number, except for homeless management information system, that's just at the top, and then enhanced support for permanent housing, which is the one that we don't have any performance data for. That will be at the end of the list. And then the new projects will be we'll have the scores, and they'll be ranked based on their scores, and then you'll have a list of those projects. And so if we could go to the next slide. So this is what Stacy asked about earlier, and I started to explain. So the reason why we are required to rank projects is because HUD allocates funding in tiers. And so tier 1 is a certain amount that we are very, very likely to get funding for. And the exact amount varies by year to year because HUD likes to keep us on our toes. Last year was 93% of the amount needed to fully fund all of our renewal projects. I think the last year it was like 95%. So it's somewhere around that. So it's very close to being able to fully fund, but there's money left that we have no guarantee about. And so the rankings of those renewal projects means that the ones that are ranking lowest based on their performance are at risk of losing a portion of their funding or all of their funding, depending on what that amount is. Tier 2 is the remaining funding that we're eligible to apply for. Just noting that we also can apply, well, we apply every year for a planning grant. That's sort of not competitive. It's separate from this process. Whether projects that are in tier 2 are funded is based on primarily HUD's scoring of our overall application. And that's based on like a whole bunch of things, some of which we don't have a lot of control over. Like, is homelessness increasing in your county? But anyway, it's separate from these applications based on what HUD thinks about our performance overall. And then the ranking of those projects. So HUD will fund projects in tier 2 from top to bottom based on their ranking. If they decide that we're eligible for all of our tier 2 funding, everything gets funded. If we're only eligible for a small slice of tier 2 funding, they fund the projects that are at the top of that ranking. And then if a project has some of its funding in tier 1 and some in tier 2, they may lose the portion of funding that's in tier 2, but they'll get the tier 1 funding. We could go to the next slide. So then HUD also requires us to have a policy and go through a process of considering whether to reallocate project funds. So this is basically a process for making sure that we don't just renew funding for current grants year after year without really considering whether that funding would be better used in a different way. And so the reallocation policy that's part of the application and award policy for Washington County is that reallocation can be used to shift funds from low performing and less needed renewal projects to create one or more new projects. And the decision to reallocate is based on determining whether the lowest scoring renewal projects are still needed based on an assessment of performance, system priorities, and current needs and gaps. And then any decisions whether to reallocate need to take into account the risk of displacing current program participants that are housed through those programs. So the way that reallocation comes into this discussion is if you decided we love this new project application that we've scored the highest, and we really want to see it funded. So we're going to move it up to tier 1. We're going to place it 3rd in all of the rankings. That moves all the other projects down. So it basically means that the lowest scoring renewal project will be at high risk of reallocation, basically not getting funding. You could also decide actively, we don't want to fund this project at all. We're going to just take the money away. That is rarely done, but last year we did have a project that opted not to continue to receive HUD funding. And so they had made that decision and had that conversation with the county. And so they were reallocated as part of the process. Next slide. So, and I realize we have very limited time, but so the question again for some discussion is, would you like to be open to putting new projects higher in the rankings in relation to renewal projects? Is that something that you would like to make time for during your the meeting where you'll be doing the rating and ranking, given all the kind of complexities of what that would mean? And we can stop screen sharing and I'll turn it over to Catherine.
So I understand for those of you who have not participated in that process, that may seem very, very theoretical and maybe hard to think through what that would actually look like in real life. So just want to open it up for questions, discussions for those that have been through the process. If you'd like to share your perspective, that might be very helpful for other members that have not experienced it yet.
I just want to say that while we might not have the same data points for programs that are applying for renewal versus new programs because they don't have outcomes related to HUD funding, that doesn't mean that those providers in those programs wouldn't have data to represent outcomes for their current programming from another funding source. Is that correct?
They would have outcomes, but they don't have. I mean, we're required, the way that we're rating the renewal projects is literally like we're pulling uniform APR data for each project for the same time period, just for the COC funded participants. And then we're looking at exact data points that are defined in a precise way, and then doing ratings based on that. So we don't have that for the project that's being proposed.
They may have other programs and other successful outcomes, but they wouldn't necessarily be apples to apples. As Chris is saying, the HUD performance measures are very prescribed and specific. Julaine.
Is sustainability of funding a criteria? So I guess, other grant committees that I've been on, part of what we're looking at is how are you going to sustain your programs and not have to apply for, to be grant dependent, but these programs, maybe they really are. So I guess I'm just thinking about that, because if you've got a nonprofit organization that is getting funding from other sources, and maybe they can, versus an organization that doesn't have funding and needs it more. So that was not a good way to explain that, but do you know what I mean?
I think so. So these projects do tend to be, renewed. They're built to be grant dependent. They do also require a 25% match. And so the organization needs to be able to come to the table, in most cases, with an identified source that would be sustainable at 25% match. There's all kinds of nuances to how the COC funds work, but in generally, if you're requesting a lot of like rent assistance funds or what we call HAP payments out of the COC, then that award will increase every year with FMR, so then will the 25% match requirement. So that is a consideration. I don't know if I explained that well enough to make sense. Chris, if you're willing to help clarify it all, that's welcome and appreciated.
Yeah, no, I think you covered that well. And maybe I'll just say one of the things that's unusual about this is that if funded for new projects that we've put forward, or for that money in tier 2, then we automatically are like the amount that is in tier 1 the following year increases. And so so we're actually interested in funding projects that are renewable. There's certain funding categories like new construction is an eligible funding category for new projects, but we actually don't allow it as part of the RFP because, and many communities don't, because that category in HUD's rules is not eligible for renewal. So it doesn't expand the pot of what the community is eligible for year after year. So there's an element of this that looks at sustainability a little bit differently than you might if you were just doing a regular grant process.
Any other thoughts or questions or kind of experiences? Oh yes, Jim. Oh, you're on mute.
There we go. A simple question. When you're looking at the projects that have been funded, the project that was funded last year, because it doesn't have data, is automatically put to the bottom of that list, right? And does that make them more susceptible to the variations in funding? Doesn't seem fair.
Yeah, so they're put at the bottom of the renewals. So they're potentially more at risk. Yeah, it's we've struggled with that because we don't have any data, so we don't have a basis for scoring them. And they're also not eligible to be reallocated, in that the committee can't say we're taking away their funding. But yes, there is some risk that they would lose the funding. And so part of it is we don't have the data. Part of it is also like, well, it's new. We have no way of knowing like what this project is going to accomplish. Yeah, there's a lot of elements of this that are like, not perfect. And we've just tried to figure out the best way to approach it. But yeah, it's complicated and not great.
Kim.
Does this committee have, I really appreciate your point, Jim. Does this committee have the flexibility to raise projects that are in their first year of renewal above projects that are in multi-year renewal but aren't showing kind of the data or the progress that we'd like to see?
Well, so the application and award policy, if I'm remembering correctly, just says this is how it works. So probably for this year, no, unless you could opt, if there were renewal projects that you really felt like their performance was very poor, you could decide to reallocate them. That means removing them from the list altogether, and that would move up the first year renewal. So that's an option within the policy. But in terms of like actually moving that project up, I think there would have to be a process to amend the award policy itself in order to do that.
Reallocation seems like a little bit of a nuclear option that I was looking to avoid.
It is a little bit. It is something we do want to do if programs are underperforming year after year. The other thing to take into consideration, and I think that kind of the historical reason for putting protecting renewals unless they were significantly underperforming is that when you close those down, those are people in housing that then need to find another way to sustain their housing. So shutting down a program is actually has real life impacts for people. And Kish, anything you want to add there?
No, yeah, I think, it's part of what we wanted to get at this was to just introduce the like really thorny issues that are part of this process. There aren't perfect answers. And so just to kind of give you a chance to just kind of start grappling with them, because you'll be grappling with them in like real life with your decisions about these projects. And so, yeah, hopefully this at least gives you some kind of background information and a sense of like, some of the parameters of what you could propose coming into that rating and ranking meeting. And obviously we'll also, we can provide additional background information at that meeting. If you're like, wait a second, I forgot, can we do this, this, and this? Yeah, it also feels very theoretical until you've seen the actual project. So, a big part of the time at that meeting is a chance to look at the rankings, to learn more about any projects that are performing really low on the ratings, and to better understand and have a discussion about those projects. So we'll build time in for all of that.
I think we assume that there will be much learning happening through this first go around that will inform, potentially changes for the next go round. This is definitely a beginning year. Any last thoughts before we move on?
Yeah, I just had a thought. I have been hearing in a number of little conversations the idea of programs that are performing well or underperforming by the data year over year, and how that can influence our decisions. But on our first discussion, I really only heard about seeing data from this last singular application period. And so I wonder, is there a plan in place for the committee members to see that historical data year over year? Another thing that came to mind to me is that for an application to be put up for new funding, there's probably some sort of rationale for why it was so prioritized, since that's such a competitive process. And so I wonder if we were faced with the decision of reallocating an existing program to try to reduce the risk that a program that's on its first year of renewal could get renewed the second year in a row, would we be able to review what the rationale was the last time of why I was chosen, why I was prioritized to be a new program in the first place?
So to answer your first question, we've typically shown data from like the previous year, and I'm happy that we could do, the last 2 years. Part of it, we adjust the ratings. There's some like updates made to the ratings, so sometimes it's harder to show comparisons, but yeah, I can build that into the information that you review prior to discussing reallocation at the ranking meeting. I think that's a great point. And yeah, for the other pieces, I mean, often we address those things through just Q&A during the meeting, and so staff who have historical background on things can provide more information. And yeah, depending on timing and how quickly we need to make a decision, there might be an opportunity for us to send follow-up information, but sometimes we have to make the decision like at that meeting based on HUD's timeline.
Thanks.
Just wanted to quickly point out that we're close to time, and I know that we scheduled until 10:30. Does everyone want to continue, or do we need to try to reschedule?
Well, and I'll say, I think we've gotten what we needed from this discussion item. There was one more that I think we can skip. It was giving you a chance to be thinking about learning a little bit more about the funding opportunity, like the local RFP, and what the funding priorities are, and then to sort of think about how we might get the word out to some of those new organizations. And so we will be sending out that RFP when it's as soon as it's ready. And I mean, I think we can accomplish that agenda item by having you commit to taking a look at those funding parameters and providing suggestions of and also just forwarding it to organizations you don't know about, but also providing suggestions to the county of oh, I really think you should forward this to these networks to really get the word out beyond the usual players. So, I think we can accomplish the third agenda item that way.
All right, handing it back to you, Nadia.
right. Well, I want to thank you all for sticking through that. And if there are any follow-up questions, I think Chris, is it okay for folks to contact you?
Yes, definitely.
And then we
Happy
can
to-
share out to the group if it's like, you know, relevant to the whole group. Are there any kind of closing questions or comments that anyone wants to share before we sign off? Great, then I can release all of you. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll be posting all of this online. So I know like Stacy had to leave, and then if anyone else, if you just want to like be able to go over things again, it'll be there. All right.
Perfect. Thanks for doing that.
Everyone.
Nice to meet you all. Bye.
Nice to meet you.
Hey, everybody.
Bye, enjoy the sunshine.
You too.